Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show on the road here in Somerville, Massachusetts with a profound human being, beautiful cat, incredible producer and musician, Al Kooper. Welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Pleasure.
Proud to be here. You brought up John Simon. John Simon, I did a really amazing interview with him, and he talked about, I'm curious, when you joined Columbia, how he helped you become a better producer.
Well, he mostly helped me when he produced the Blood, Sweat, and Tears album. For years, I made demos as a songwriter. So, and they were, you could put volumes of albums out of those demos, saying what they were. But I won't.
Absolutely, but this album had horns, and for a rock album, that was completely unique.
So did the demos. So did the demos that I did.
Right.
If I knew how to write for strings, they would have had strings. So I just watched them produce the Blood, Sweat, and Tears album and went, oh, okay.
You sat back and watched him in terms of how he...
Well, yeah, what else was I going to do? This whole process was, I'd never seen anything like that before. And I'd been produced by people, but not like that. So I went, oh, okay. I was kind of unlucky. I think we would cut the rhythm section first.
Okay.
Right.
Until we got the track right. And then we would overdub the horns. We were already playing gigs. So, but he also came in and made the charts better, the arrangements. And that was a big help. And then there was a song I wanted to do with just strings. And he didn't say, no, you can't do that.
He knew how to arrange for strings.
He wrote the string parts.
Wow.
And they were phenomenal. They were so far over my head that I went, wow, am I lucky.
Is it true that you did want to add horns to the Blues Project?
Yes.
And
they said no.
Right. And what was because when I talked to Jimmy Heath from the Heath Brothers, those R&B bands, James Brown and the Flames, going back to the early 60s, mid 60s, those were all big horn bands.
Yes,
but in the small ensembles in burgeoning blues rock music, there had never been horns. So the Blues Project, Danny was ambivalent to this stuff?
Danny Cowell?
Yeah, or whatever the truth is, you wanted to put horns in that band, but had that not been done before? Why did they push back on that? To me, that would have been a amazing sonic expansion of that group.
I think maybe they thought they couldn't afford it. I just started to put a new band together. And I didn't have very much experience other than sax players in bands. So I had to audition horn players till I found the 4 that I thought could do the job. That took a long time. I had the rhythm section, but I didn't have the horns.
Is it fair to say that horn section, trumpet, it was 2 saxophones, trumpet and...
2 trumpets.
2 trumpets.
Sax and trombone.
And would you say that was kind of unheard of in the rock world?
I didn't think like that.
I know you didn't. But looking back, that is an iconic album and one of those things where it's like, regardless of the fallout from it, it remains a very sophisticated album, and according to the lore, somewhat of a forerunner. And was it because of that horn?
I don't think anyone had done that except for Chicago.
Right. Although I don't know Chicago Transit Authority, I don't know if their first album was birthed until after the Blood, Sweat, and Tears out. Was it before?
I think
Okay. You know, this is something I wanted to ask you about. You talked about being roommates in Nashville with Robbie Robertson.
Yeah.
When did you first meet the band?
Good question. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Let me ask you, was it possibly when, just listening to that interview with Harvey Brooks today, Bobby Gregg didn't want to leave his family in Philly. Bloomfield wanted to stay with Butterfield. This is for the Forest Hill gig. So who did Dylan get? He got Levon on drums and Robbie on guitar. Is it possible that was the first time you met them?
I don't think it was Forest Hills. I think it was Newport.
Were they the Hawks at that time, or they were already the band?
No, they were the Hawks.
Wow.
We got along very well. We laughed a lot.
You had good simpatico together.
Yes. That didn't hurt.
Absolutely, and you knew some of Bob's tunes. Would you say like you kind of worked? Can you just talk about how you and him worked in the studios with those musicians? Because Bob wasn't really communicating verbally with them about it. You were able. I know you facilitated that. What was Robbie's role?
Well, he would teach me the songs, and I would teach him to the band. When he was writing the songs, I would sit there with him, and he would teach me the songs, and then I would play them over and over, and he would sit and write the words. So I knew the songs quite well by the time we started doing the album. So I became the band leader because I knew all the songs.
You were playing piano.
I was playing keyboards.
And he would actually write the lyrics while you were playing the melodies.
Yes.
So what would you say Robbie's role was down there?
At what point?
In Nashville. I mean, if you were the band lead, what was his role in Nashville?
He was the guitar player, one of them.
Well, there were quite a few pretty nasty guitar players down there.
Well, he was a pretty nasty.
He was nasty,
player.
but I mean, so him and Bob were very close. Bob and him had really.
Yeah, they had been on the road together. So, like I said, we roomed together. So mostly we just laughed a lot because we were our personalities were good together.
I've interviewed George Clinton, P-Funk, Parliament Funkadelic.
Yeah.
He was in the Brill Building for.
Oh well, not that I knew of, but there was an incredible amount of people.
I'm saying it was, and
Well, first of all,
yeah, go ahead.
I wasn't in the Brill Building, so I was writing for a publisher who was at 1650 Broadway and 51st and Broadway. And I had grown up there in the Royal Teens. They were in 1650 Broadway, so I was completely comfortable. I'd been there since I was 14. And the publisher signed us as writers, so we didn't write for anybody else. And we wrote for him, and we wrote these songs, and he took these songs, the publisher, and his job was to find people to record them. That's what publishers did. So we wrote the songs, and he got them placed. And it wasn't just us. It was the whole generation of people who were doing what we were doing at that time. For instance, Jerry Goffin and Carole King. They worked for a publisher called Alden Music. But Alden Music, Al Nevins and Don Kirshner, hence Al Don. But it was called Alden. And they signed the best writers there were. And everybody was up there writing songs every day. And we were in another place like that.
Right.
and there were other people writing at the place we were at. And we came in and we wrote songs every day.
So this is fascinating. There was no artist attached to the songs you were writing. The publisher would go out and find artists that were interested in possibly
Exactly.
dig. Okay, so let's just go through it. Let's just take Pitney. Where was Pitney based in the country? Was he in Midwest or in the South?
New York.
He was in New York.
Yes.
Wow.
He came from Connecticut.
I just wonder what it was like, if you remember the first time as 14 or 15-year-old of hearing a song that you were collaborated on writing, when you heard it on the radio, what that feeling was like.
It was great. It was probably this time in Ring. I think I still live with my parents.
That is incredible. And you started receiving writers' royalties at 14 or 15?
No, I started earning writers' royalties at 14 or 15.
Okay, and then they would accrue, and once you became an adult, you got them? Or how did that work?
Well, when I started working for a publisher, I got paid every week. And the two other writers that I wrote with did too.
Right.
So they had to deduct that first and then pay us.
Did you ever get to see, well, he was long gone by then. Bird was long gone.
Yeah.
But Birdland remained.
Charlie Parker was before my time. So I didn't, I wasn't influenced by or listened to much of him. Hank Crawford, on the other hand, was my hero on alto saxophone.
Because he was with the Ray Charles groups, you got hip to him, or even just his solo?
No, he had his own albums.
On Atlantic, yeah, he was pretty hip. You really got off on Hank. I love that.
Oh yeah. He played alto the way I love to hear alto played, and when I put horns bands together, I couldn't come up with anybody that played like that till Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Freddie Lipsius. He could play like that.
Lipsius could play like that.
And he did.
Do you remember how, because you said that the recruitment of those horns took a minute. You went through quite a few people.
Right.
Do you know how you got hip to Lipsius originally?
I heard him play.
Live or you brought, or just, he cut?
I think I auditioned him.
Wow.
Also, we got along very well. And so he was the first horn player I got. And then he brought in the other horn players. He knew the other horn players. So he brought in a succession of horn players till I liked them. I had no real experience with horn players till then. I'd worked with horn players, but guys that were big guys in the studio, and they weren't going to play with any kid band.
I mean, Hank was really his own. He was a band leader.
Hank was playing with Ray Charles.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think.
I hired him for a session once. Picking the horn players for Blood, Sweat, and Tears, I don't think we ever had an older horn player. I think the most experienced one was Randy Brecker.
Yeah, and even at that time, that was for Randy. I mean, he had done a lot of stuff. I mean, he had been at Indiana.
He did studio work. That's mostly where I got these guys from, but I wanted young guys. I didn't want old guys. So I got young guys.
Did you ever, I think maybe I asked you this, but were you familiar with just not even something called the Chitlin Circuit? Upstate?
No, well, that was called that because it was Southern.
Yeah, but there was one that ran through upstate New York because, I mean, Gads...
Well, that wasn't a Chitlin Circuit then.
Right, but what is that? Did you ever, because those places were pretty magical, and a lot of the cats...
Yeah, but it wasn't New York. That's where I was.
Right. You never,
So
but even in touring with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, you did you go down south with them? Not that you played on the Chitlin circuit, but would you tour the South with Blood, Sweat, and Tears?
I don't remember. I think we played a 10-city tour when the album came out. And then I left the band. Just giving you the look. Hi, Nellie. You can't get me because of the garbage can.
You know, I wanted to ask you about a time in your life that you faced a lot of adversity, how you overcame it, and how it made you stronger.
What time was that?
You just pick out one time.
What?
One time when you were really facing a lot of adversity in your life and how you overcame it and how it made you a stronger person.
I don't think of a time when I faced adversity.
4 marriages.
Oh, you mean that?
No, I mean,
I thought
like,
you meant in the music business.
well, I mean, so it's fair to say that everything was, I mean, I've heard just, I mean, you got to be a little bit crazy to be a musician, or in your case, you never had any adversity within the music.
She's smart or what?
Yeah.
Bet you didn't even come to me. She was just trapped. There's nobody in here. Ask me again.
From a musical point of view, in any capacity, was there a time when you were really up against it, you were facing adversity, and ultimately how you overcame it, or how you sort of figured your way out of it, and made you just a stronger person constitutionally?
Well, this is my 4th marriage. So I went through, the bust-ups of 3 marriages. And it was just, I had to deal with it. And I had work to do as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I've just known cats that have either had to leave. I mean, this great drummer had to leave Bill Evans' band because his wife at the time was just furious that he was always on the road. I mean, it's hard to keep a family together, period.
Oh, well, I only had that problem in my first marriage.
Because you had your son.
Son.
Your son.
Yeah. But in fact, our marriage broke up before my son was born.
Really?
Yeah. I think she was 3 months pregnant.
And
that is my only child.
Right. And you gotta give him a call and talk to him, just hear his voice. It's important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Life is precarious and fleeting.
No, I know all that.
Yeah, I know. It's fascinating there. In your mind, what are the best, you're a very humble person, but it's like, what are the qualities of leadership in the studio or on the bandstand that are most important in your mind? I see there's a lot of people.
You have to know what you're doing. That's the most important thing. If you're in charge and you don't know what you're doing, then you're in a bad situation. So I try to avoid that.
I guess what I'm saying is, what does it mean to know what you're doing? I mean, it's the idea of saying don't micromanage. Let people come in and why did you hire them? To be themselves. I'm just saying there's little subtle techniques.
Well, I'm saying you know what you're doing. You learn from experience. And every experience you learn a yes or a no.
You point to a specific example that you can, sort of personalize?
Well, simply, if you hire a musician and he has troubles outside the band, that's a no-no. And as soon as you find that out, see you later.
Right. Late to the gigs.
But I didn't enjoy being the leader in that respect.
Too much babysitting.
Well, too much responsibility. So I did that once, and then I quit being in bands.
You quit?
I would lead bands, but it would be under my name. It would be Al Kooper.
Al Kooper,
You're
right.
coming to see Al Kooper. And I had people in my band. And I'd introduce them, and I'd pay them, and I'd teach them, and that was it.
And they had to stay within the guidelines of not if they had stuff outside that was detrimental, then they'd be replaced.
Well, it had to be their priority.
That's right. That's a good point. Yeah.
If it wasn't, then I'd get somebody else.
What about somebody? Did you ever come across someone who was just a savant and it was an integral part to a band, and yet they were strung out or late, and it was really, you see this on sports teams sometimes where the guy is so talented and he's such
Top sports teams, horn players.
Was there somebody that was painful for you to have to let go because they were really an asset to the band, but they were a total mess?
I wouldn't name them.
But that did come into the lexicon. That did happen.
I'm sure it did.
One thing I was hoping to listen to at some point is this session that is really this Frankie and Johnny session that you have on tape. That was a band. Now those guys, you must have been pretty tight with those guys.
They were my band.
Their names do not jump off the page to me.
Well, they weren't famous.
Absolutely, but I mean, when you say they were your band,
they were musicians I hired to back me up.
In New York?
I lived in New York.
Right, but ultimately...
we toured everywhere.
Can you talk about those cats? Because I find that to be...
I also produced an album of them called Frankie and Johnny.
Well, with that Whitman Candy.
I called them Frankie and Johnny. The album was called The Sweetheart Sample.
I know, and that cover was... They threatened to sue you with the cover because it was too identical to the Candy?
Not me, the record company. And so the record company never put the record out.
There are a few copies floating around.
Oh, I have it. I don't know if anybody else does. But it was a great album. Really good.
Do you stay in touch with any of those cats today?
No. Not those particular two guys.
Interesting.
I would if they called me.
Absolutely.
I'm not enemies with them. I just don't,
Well,
we moved
life
on.
goes on, yeah.
Yeah, we moved on.
How did you, looking back on it,
But there's an unreleased album that we did that's quite good.
I just want to hear it. I mean, that to me is like...
Well, then shut that thing off and I'll play you
Oh,
something.
we will. No, absolutely. A couple more minutes. That was on Sounds of the South.
No, it was on Warner
It
Brothers.
was on Warner's. Do you think you would pursue music today?
I do pursue music today.
I mean, if you were starting out at 14 or 15 today.
I have no idea.
It's
I'm not 14 or 15 now.
I just wonder what it was like to be a road dog back then, because my friends that I'm up here seeing are brilliant musicians, and they're playing original music, and they're starving to death.
Well, it's the same as it ever was.
Same as it ever was. But the cost of living wasn't as crazy back then.
I don't know about that. I mean, comparatively. You got paid so much back then. I mean, so little back then.
That's true. But you could, that money also, you could go and still, talking to Brecker, he had a loft for $160 on the Lower West Side. He could make that in 1 week in the studio, and then you could go out and...
Yeah, most guys don't play in the studio, and especially today.
Well, there is no studio scene. What comparatively?
So I'm saying, there you go. So you can't compare the two.
Did you know Steve Tyrell back then? He worked with Dion with that.
No, I know who he is.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture his
Warwick,
face.
Burt Bacharach, the Howard, the thing we were talking about earlier.
He didn't work with Burt Bacharach. Well, how did he work with Burt Bacharach?
Well, he was just what you were. He was a writer. He was working in one of those, not necessarily.
Yeah, but did he write a song with Burt Bacharach?
I think he worked extensively with Dionne Warwick and Burt Bacharach. Yeah.
Well, you can't say that. What has worked extensively with?
I'd have to go back and look at my notes. It's just from that time period, the label that you talked about, Howard, the two cats that were that formed the record label, their names.
You mean Nevins and Kirshner?
That's who he worked for.
Uh-huh. That was a publishing company.
Right, a publishing company, exactly.
So if he worked for them, he would have had to have written songs.
Exactly, so I'll have to go back and look at that, but I wasn't, so. Did you ever use Bernard Purdie on it?
All the time.
On what?
Demos of the songs that I wrote when I was a songwriter.
Okay, so
I would hire him all the time.
the songs you were writing with Brass and Levine.
Yes.
Okay. So you wrote those songs, and then but to further this, you also brought in the musicians to play the song.
Just for demos, so we could play them for other people.
I got it. Everett Barksdale, Purdy, who were your...
Those were the people that were in the studio at the time. They were studio musicians. They played on records, they played on demos, they were studio musicians. They were the guys that you would call to play on things.
And then those demos would go... But ultimately, the song that became a hit, would that be the rhythm section on the track itself?
One thing had nothing to do with the other. One was a demo, and the other was someone heard the demo, a producer, and said, I want to do this song. And then they would go and take their band, whoever they used, and cut it with whoever they produced. One thing had nothing to do
Absolutely, but I'm wondering about how much, especially when you were at Columbia, if you...
That's another story. I was a producer then.
Absolutely. No,
you were talking to me as a writer just then.
Right. So with Purdy, so the demos, you would actually personally, with the trifecta, you could choose the cat you wanted to make the demo.
Within the realm of people who would take that money.
It would just be like a studio date pay kind of thing?
Yeah.
It was Purdy. And who were your go-to cats? Chuck Rainey, maybe?
Yes. New York. Any of the New York guys.
Yeah, but we're talking like like for instance, did you hire Paul Griffin on demos before you met him at the Highway 61 session?
No, I never really heard him much till I played with him on the Dylan sessions.
And
Matter of fact, on Sooner or Later, One of Us Must Know, he played so good that I could barely play. And we were sitting, I was sitting here and he was sitting there. So he was playing, there, and I was playing here. And he was playing that stuff, and I was going, I can't watch this, or I won't be able to play. I can't even listen to it, or I won't be able to play. That was what was going on in my head. It was ridiculous what he was playing.
How would...
Even on, like a Rolling Stone, the piano playing is magnificent.
Yeah.
And I'm going, da, 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 da.
It's Callers, baby.
No, I'm saying.
Yeah.
Piano playing is magnificent. So he was always one of my heroes, especially after those days.
Absolutely. Did you ever cross paths with Alan Toussaint?
Yeah, but I can't remember why or how.
He had C-Sane Studios down.
I know.
Oh yeah. No, I'm just curious. I mean, you've been all over the country, or at least in the going Nashville, Atlanta, Studio One, all the Columbia stuff. Did you have early on when Clive Davis brought you in? was there a learning curve at that point, or
Oh, sure.
that's what I'm talking about with the adversity. Like, how did you work through that to get to a point when all of a sudden, Rubinson's like, yo, well, that's you playing. But when I'm saying, what was the biggest learning curve when you got to Columbia, even though you've had previous experience writing tunes?
It's very similar to sex.
Right. The more you do it, the better you get.
Yes.
Just the perfect way to end this interview, dude. Looking forward to listening to Frankie and Johnny, and many more hangs with you, Brother Kooper. I have so much more work.
How are you going to hear Frankie and Johnny?
Are we going to stream it?
Huh?
Can we listen on the computer?
Yeah.
I'm going to stop the interview now.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
What am I doing?
This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.